What is going on, y'all, and welcome to week 21 of the competition prep vlog series. Lots going on this week. Kind of a crazy week. We got the 50-mile march this week. So, little backstory here. For the past 2 years, I have taken part in a 50-mile march in Omaha that goes from Lincoln, Nebraska to Omaha, Nebraska, and it's basically designed to raise money and awareness for veterans. The march starts at 5 p.m. on Saturday and goes through the night and ends at 3 p.m. on Sunday. The 22 hours is there to symbolize the 22 veterans that take their own lives daily. So a cause that I feel very strongly about, but one that is not really in line with the ideal bodybuilding prep endeavors. But all that to say, I was proud to take part in it. That was this week. That went from this Saturday to this Sunday. So let's kind of dive into how that impacted my prep protocol. So looking at the spreadsheet here, you can see that week 21 started on Monday, obviously. I weighed in at 162.1 pounds. And then I did cardio that day, 20 minutes, level 15. My macros for this week were 125 grams of fat, 190 grams of protein. Again, we are dropping the protein week to week. 15 grams total carbs for a total of 1945 on the calories. That winds up yielding, with the manipulations I made later in the week, an average about 61.2% of my total calories coming from dietary fat. Now, with this march, I did not want it to really change what I did from a macronutrient standpoint. I literally marched 50 miles. That's over 100,000 steps through the night, zero sleep. I did not add anything crazy different with my meals. I had all my meals prepped, ready to go as per usual with the prep protocol. My main concerns going into the march was that I was going to have a whole bunch of fluid retention in my legs and ankles, especially from driving to Omaha to begin with. So whenever I drive for any extended period of time, I typically hold a lot of fluid in my legs, and I was worried about that kind of, spilling over into the following week, which is peak week for me. Didn't want that to happen. I mitigated against that by wearing compression socks throughout the drive and the march. And in years prior with the march, like the first year, I was literally on crutches for a week, which would negatively impact my ability to train during the following peak week. So I was a little bit concerned about that. Last year when I did the march, I was not on crutches at any length of time, but I was definitely hobbling around for like the next 2 or 3 days after the march. So again, didn't really want that to impair my peak week protocol. So I really went into this march trying to do everything I could to mitigate any risk of injury. I'm in an incredibly depleted state right now. I'm low calories. I'm more subject to risk of injury. So I just really tried to play it safe. So Crystal and Rigel came with me. We brought the rig. They were my dedicated crew. They came there with me at every stop. At every stop, I elevated my feet, took my socks off, put on some salty britches, which basically is an anti-chafing ointment to ensure that I didn't have blisters. I was wearing zero drop wide toe box shoes to help with my flat feet that are overpronated. And I was wearing like a specialty insole that basically helps stimulate blood flow. So I truly tried to rule out all the variables and just prevent risk of injury with this march. And it worked because it was painful. Marching 50 miles is never easy, but I didn't sustain any injuries and I felt great after the march. And we raised over $280,000 for veterans. So I feel very strongly about that. Very proud of that. But when it comes to the macros, like I said, 125 grams of fat, 190 grams of protein, and 15 grams of total carbs. As you look at my weight going down the week here, my weight on Friday was 158. So I had a refeed meal on Friday as per usual with the plan, kind of starting the prior week, going into this week as well. That refeed consisted of the ketogenic caloric refeed pizza. So that bumped up my macros to 200 grams of fat, 200 grams of protein, and 20 grams of total carbs. And then that would be on Friday. On Saturday, when we actually started the march, I went ahead and had an additional keto brick. Now, that bumped up my macros to 215 grams of fat, 225 grams of protein, 15 grams total carbs. The only difference I made on that day was the addition of that keto brick. I kept my electrolytes in check with what I've been doing for the weeks prior. Everything else was unanimously the same. And the reason I had that extra keto brick was not necessarily because of the march, although it would be a justifiable reason, but it was because of on the actual show day next week, I'm going to be incorporating an additional keto brick on show day. So I kind of wanted to test it out in the context of the march because it would give me the extra fuel to kind of supply the energy for those additional calories that I was expending. Plus, I can kind of see how my body responded to the additional keto brick like I'm going to do on show day itself. So if we dive into what that looks like on the foods, we'll pull up my macros plus here, kind of keeping things the same. I had 7 tablespoons of the roasted nut pods creamer, almond milk creamer in my coffee, 4 eggs, 4 ounces of salmon, 100 grams of egg whites. So that's been dropping. That's been pretty much the main thing I've been dropping as the protein's been dropping. Protein's been dropping by about 10 grams a week. So reducing the egg whites is a super easy way to accomplish that. Kept my 16 ounces of venison in there. And then I had 1 chocolate peanut butter cup keto brick every day this week. From an electrolyte standpoint, like I said, I kept all of that constant. The 2 hydration packets, the buffalo seasoning in that meal 1, Jonathan Shane's energized reds, a scoop of Relight in the morning, Mike Mutzel's Myoscience electrolytes post meal. I typically have that after my meal because I salt my meal pretty heavily. I put these 10 grams of real salt on that meal, and his Myoscience is pretty strong in potassium, more so than sodium. So I put that on there. About 3 to 3.5 packets of Elements a day. And then I'll also add some upgraded potassium, liquid nanoparticle potassium. Basically, every time I have a scoop of Element, I'll have 1 teaspoon of that nanopotassium, which is about 200 milligrams of potassium. That gives me a total of about 12,500 milligrams of sodium a day. So that's what I was doing all throughout this week, except for the refeed pizza, which was, I said, on Friday. I'll pull that up, and that is pretty much 9 tablespoons of that nut pod creamer, 8 eggs in the morning, 4 ounces of venison instead of 16, and then the keto refeed pizza made with the almond flour. I had 1 Bell's Brownie keto brick, 7 ounces of 8515 beef, and then 6 ounces of mozzarella cheese to make that crust. And pretty much I kept everything else the same, but then bumped up my sodium on that refeed pizza to 17 grams of real salt throughout the day. So 10 grams in that meal, an additional 7 grams with the refeed pizza. So my total sodium for the day is 15,200 milligrams of sodium. So pretty hefty dose of sodium. That is what I had on Friday, so the day before the march. Like I said, on the following day, the day of the march, I bumped that up even more with testing out that additional keto brick. That was the only change I made, so I just simply added a milk and cookies keto brick. That bumped up my total intake to just shy of 3,000 calories, 215 grams of fat, and 225 grams of protein, and the sodium stayed the same at about 12,500 milligrams of sodium. So that was the only change I did nutritionally speaking as it pertains to this week before peak week with the addition of that 50-mile march. So pretty significant increase in calories burned as a result of that march, but no inflammation, no ankle swelling, and not too much pain the following day. Like, I was really blessed to not have any pain after the march was over, because then I was able to go into peak week without any issues. So that's really, really good news there. Now let's dive into some posing footage here. Actually, before I dive into posing footage, I want to show you all what my weight did. So, like I said, on Friday I was 158 pounds going into the day of the refeed. On Saturday, this 162 pounds is a little bit higher because I literally marched through the night, and then I'm pretty sure I stepped on the scale, which was in the rig at some point in the night, and I was 162 pounds there. So that could have been from food, that could have been mostly from inflammation from the march, from lack of sleep, lots of factors at play there. And then the next day, on Sunday, I was 159 pounds. So again, not too much of an issue with fluid retention, which was very, very surprising to me, but I am certainly not complaining because that was something that I was a little concerned about. All right, let's dive into the posing footage here. So here we have posing footage taken on Monday the 21st. Got my symmetry round poses here. And you can see, again, this footage doesn't really do it justice. Like, I'll take pictures or I'll look in the mirror at night, and I think that illustrates it a lot better. But this, even with the footage, you can see more separation in the muscles coming through, more vascularity coming through, just more overall definition coming through, specifically in my quadriceps. You see this little line right here in the very tops of my legs. That's new. That wasn't there a few weeks ago. So that is very promising indeed. I've got more striations in my chest, which is always a plus. Everything's just sharpening up and getting much tighter at this point in the game, which is great going into the week before my first show, so a week before the peak week. Here I am doing some side tricep movements and then kind of playing around with this classic side tricep pose. More or less have got that dialed in now, working on transitions. Practice posing every single day when you're this close to the show. So that's one thing that people oftentimes take for granted. They're not as diligent as they need to be with their posing. You can have all the definition in the world, you can have all the muscle in the world, you can have your nutrition dialed in, your electrolytes on point, but if you can't showcase that properly with proper posing, then you're going to be counted off for it from a judging perspective, and it's not going to be doing you any favors. So do not take posing for granted at this stage in the game. You have to get your posing dialed in. So for the past several weeks, I've committed to posing every single day. I'll work on my posing routine, I'll work on my mandatory muscular poses, I'll work on my mandatory symmetry poses, but every single day I'm hitting those poses, even if it's just for 10 or 15 minutes. Just commit to that, get that mind-muscle connection, know what you're looking like without a mirror. All this posing is done without a mirror. I've got the camera set up, Chip's filming this, and I'm not using a mirror to see how I'm looking. So that's one thing I'd really like to stress at this point in the game. As you get closer and closer to show day, make sure you're focusing on your posing. I'm making this video relatively short because next week is in fact peak week for my first competition. Let's go back to the spreadsheet here. You can see my very first show of the season is on Saturday, the 2nd of September. That's going to be in Logan, Utah. That's an OCB Federation show. That'll be my first show of the season, and we're going to have a whole lot of content in next week's video talking about peak week strategy, what I'm doing with my training, what I'm doing with everything. Real quick note on training. So that footage was taken on Monday. After the march, like I said, I was concerned about fluid retention. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. After finishing that march, I looked in the mirror and I was lighter than I had ever been, and I was freaking grainy as all get out, and I still had a pretty good degree of muscle fullness and a pretty significant increase in vascularity. Maybe that was because of all the activity of the march, which is kind of counterintuitive because I would think it would be the exact opposite due to the inflammation and fluid retention. Maybe it was because of that additional keto brick that helped fill me out even more. But either way, I was very pleased with how I was looking post-show, or post-march rather. I took some pictures immediately after the march, and I'll post those in here so you can kind of see what those are looking like. But I felt really, really good about how I was looking with that said. So going forward, I'm not stressed at all about going into peak week. I feel good about how my body's responding to that march. I feel good about my recovery with that march. I feel really good about everything overall. I feel good about my posing. Next week is peak week, ladies and gentlemen. So I have a very detailed video for you there, walking you through every manipulation I'm making in regards to peak week of this first show. So I'm super excited about that. And I will see you next week for week 22 and peak week.